Now it's good afternoon, and welcome to the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project's webinar on Exploring Discipline and Disproportionality, Bakersfield City School District's Journey. Thank you so much for joining us. I am here. My name is George Trieste. I'm the director of this project. I'm here at the Napa County Office of Education with my wonderful colleagues, Connie Silver-Broussard, Linda Blond, Jen DeShazer, Rebecca Anderson, and Susan Stewart. It's our pleasure to present you with this webinar. So just a very quick overview of the Napa County Office of Education's SPP-TAP project. We provide training and technical assistance to districts throughout California on issues around disproportionality and significant disproportionality. We do that by providing webinars, communities of practice, technical assistance facilitators, assistance to districts, ongoing assistance in the individual assistance to districts who have questions and issues around disproportionality, and we have a wonderful website, SPP-TAP to get the latest, greatest information on disproportionality. And I want to let everybody know that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived as our other webinars are, and will be posted on our website shortly. I want also people to know that you may chat in your questions as this webinar proceeds in the chat box, which is located in the lower left-hand part of your screen. Feel free to chat anything you'd like, any questions, any concerns. We will monitor the chat as our presenters will, and we'll be providing you with responses that way. So with that, chat in your questions, and now it's time to introduce our presenters. I'd like to introduce first Jon Eyler. Jon currently operates an educational services and consulting firm in Southern California named Collaborative Learning Solutions. His work is focused on assisting districts to develop school-wide systems of preventing behavior incidents and mitigating disproportionate representation. His work also includes the development of intensive intervention programs for students with a history of significant behavioral challenges. He's trained thousands of administrative support providers, teachers, and parents on the topics of discipline, positive behavior interventions, motivation, disproportionality, and equity in education. Our main presenter will be Tim Fulenwider. Tim is the Director of the Instructional Support Service Division in Bakersfield City School District. In his role, Dr. Fulenwider operates student support programs for the district's 43 schools, including the implementation of positive behavior supports. Prior to his current role, Dr. Fulenwider has served as Director of School Support, supervising a third of the district's principals, as a principal at both the elementary and middle school levels, and as a classroom teacher. The genesis of this webinar was really what we heard from you out there, and that is you wanted to know what are good things happening in the districts. We want to hear from districts who are implementing good things for us to consider while we go through the issues around disproportionality. Therefore, we are presenting this webinar in hopes that you take from it some of those good things that are happening there in Bakersfield. And now, I'd like to present Jon Eyler. Jon, take it away. Press *6 to turn your camera on.
Okay, can you hear me? You got a thumbs up, George?
We hear you well.
With you.
All right. Thank you. Well, thanks, George. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names in the room, so it's good to kind of see you in here again. I'm going to speak just very briefly before I turn this over to Tim, and he can speak in greater detail about the great work they've been doing here in Bakersfield City School District. I want to just give a brief overview or background of basically where we started with Bakersfield City, kind of where we are presently, and then Tim's going to talk about the work that they've done, and we'll focus a little bit on the future developments towards the end. So I'll be here for another 2 minutes, and then Tim's going to take over here. With regard to the data piece, my involvement in Bakersfield City Schools started, I think, 3 or so years ago, and the district was identified as disproportionate. And so we started with a strategy of looking at discipline data across the board. We looked at a full year of data. We looked at identification data. And really, I think many of you have seen this before, but our strategy was very similar to what we do with many districts who are in the significant disproportionate category, if you will, or that designation. And really, it's a strategy of triangulation. And our goal here was to look at this from a lens of equity, not necessarily from just the lens of disproportionality and trying to get out of that. Just real briefly, here's kind of some of the areas that we take a look at within the area of identification. We tend to use the New York data workbook, and that seems to be a go-to. It's a quantitative tool that we've used. We also do some supplemental data analysis, so we look at point of entry when our kids entering the system. In special education, we look at the referral source. Where are these referrals coming from? Are they from within the system? Are they coming from outside the system? Are they coming from parents? And then we also do a comparison of data between databases. And sometimes what we find is that districts who are in a situation of disproportionality, there's some data cleanup, if you will, to do in that area. So that's the start in terms of identification. Within the discipline category, we look at a full year of data. We do an annual discipline data analysis.
Thank you, though.
We also look at monthly discipline
data. Thanks so much, Liza. Have a great time. Thanks.
Again, someone's audio is coming through.
Oh.
So, John, hold on for a second. We're going to mute the phones and then go again, and you might have to press *6 again.
Okay.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Okay, John, so press *6 and proceed.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Excellent.
Yep.
All right, there we go. So with the monthly discipline data, for some of our clients, what we've done is give them feedback every single month in terms of their suspensions with regard to disproportionality. So how many kids in the district right now by race and ethnicity have contributed to the disproportionality calculation. So we're looking specifically at the number of kids with more than 10 days of suspension. That's what the monthly discipline data report is. And then the other indicators that we look at down at the bottom under other, these are coming from the CDE's Data Quest website. A little bit in terms of strategy, this is a new piece of information that this is kind of the present Bakersfield City. This is a focus right now. In fact, Tim and I were just working on some of this today, and I had permission from Dr. Eddie Fergus to share this with the group, but this is kind of the current thinking around setting up a culturally responsive PBIS model. And so there's a very clear framework around PBIS, and it's very clear and easy to follow that. But the challenge now that we're seeing in Bakersfield, you'll hear a little bit about this, is more of the risk. So we see the same subgroups that are at highest risk for ending up in the discipline file, if you will, or the discipline bucket. We've reduced the risk, but it still is discrepant in comparison to other racial ethnic subgroups. So this is a tool that we're using to help guide our conversation, and we're looking at revamping kind of a fidelity tool to look at PBIS implementation in Bakersfield City School through a culturally responsive lens. And so I just wanted to share this with the group in terms of a tool that we're starting to develop here in Bakersfield City and a place that we're at currently in PBIS implementation. One of those areas that you saw on that table includes the disaggregation of data by race and ethnicity. Tim is going to share a little bit about the way Bakersfield City is doing that. They use a risk ratio, and they track that monthly. But other ways to discuss this are to look at patterns or trends within incidents by race and ethnicity. And this is just one example of how that would look from a culturally responsive PBIS model. And just to give you another example of what a risk ratio table might look like, we're looking at tracking risk month by month by race and ethnicity throughout a system. So that was my quick little spiel, if you will, on data. Where did we start with Bakersfield City? It started with a comprehensive look at data. It landed in a position of equity. We're committed to looking at equity across the board. And then just a little piece on where we are right now. And it's looking at the PBIS structure through a lens of equity and how do you actually build that? What are the look-fors when you go onto a site? I'm going to turn this over to Tim. We're going to swap seats so he can take this, but get out of your way there.
All right, greetings from Bakersfield, California. Thanks for joining today. We're really excited to talk about the great work that we're doing here and hopefully learn from some of you at the same time. So appreciate you being here and listening to our story. So here we go. Some few facts about Bakersfield City. So we serve over 30,000 students, so we're a relatively large district. I think we go back and forth with Chula Vista between the largest K-8 district in the state, so we kind of take a little pride in that. We have 43 schools in our district, pre-K through 8. And as you look at our diversity, we're primarily an inner city district, so we're 88% socioeconomically disadvantaged. 41% of our district is English language learners, primarily a Latino district, but we do have a significant populations of African American and Caucasian students as well. So that's just a little brief. We're located in the Central Valley here in California, and around us is primarily an agricultural community, so we're in our region kind of the inner city part for Kern County. So just a little bit history here, and before I go into kind of where we started, I want to give kind of recognition to certain people. You know, this has been a big journey for us, and many people have tried in our district to bring up the issues of disproportionality or racial discrimination, and they haven't always been met with open arms, as you might imagine. And it's been a difficult journey for us, but there's been some conditions that have come together that have allowed us to move on that journey. So all the administrators in our district are now committed to moving forward on this issue. So back in 2010-11, roughly 10% of our students had received at least one suspension, which is extremely high. I think the state numbers that just came out just last week were something like 4.4% of students in the state. Well, we were more than double that. So, that's pretty high rate. We also had extreme disproportionality with our African American students and our special education students. So you can see 1 in 4 African Americans would have been suspended back in 2010 and 11, and then 15% of our special education population. So as a district, we had over 7,000 incidents of suspension, and for 13,000 suspension days. So you can see it's a significant loss of instructional time, and so that was something we knew we really needed to do something about. And those numbers are actually better than they were probably 2 years prior to that. So we've been on a pretty difficult journey starting from here. So what happened about that time that helped us is a couple of things. One, we were identified as significantly disproportionate as it relates to special education students, and so that kind of forced us to begin seeking technical assistance around that issue. And that's how we met Dr. Eyler, and so our special education director kind of started that process, and then we just kind of moved forward from there. But we had a new superintendent join the district, Dr. Robert Arias, and we started implementing some steps within the district. So our superintendent had come in and said, we need to address these issues. We need to address the racial discrimination, the disparaging levels of achievement in our district. So we began to do a lot of research and support. So our research and evaluation director, our academic improvement and accountability department, our special ed education department, all kind of put heads together around what are things that we need to do in the district that will support this work. And we also started, we want to stress the importance of coming together as a district and moving forward as a district. In the past, when we had tried to move on certain issues, if any one little piece was kind of out of place, it made it very difficult to move forward and sometimes stop the whole process. So it's a shout out to all those people in our district. We also created our RTI model. So we haven't really had an RTI model in the district. This is the model we created. You know, if we had to do it over again, I think one of the things we would change is, you see in Tier 3, we just list special education in Tier 3. I think our thinking regarding that has changed a lot, that special education really flows throughout the tiers, you know, in a solid RTI model. But again, that's one of those cultural things in our district that we're working to kind of change and adjust. All right, we also wrote, you know, our LEA plan, and we laid out 3 years worth of actions. And some of these actions have changed. You can see them on the screen. But we called out a performance goal that we were going to implement preventative, discipline, and attendance models that promote positive student contact to increase attendance and address disproportionality. In our plans, we are actually calling out we're going to address disproportionality, and that's a very big step. To actually publicly say we are committed to doing this work is very important. And to have the governing board pass this is also very important. So, you know, I want to encourage you as you do this work, the more you can publicly make statements around your commitment to the work, I think the better off it is moving forward. So we wrote a lot of these actions, and as you kind of see from the actions that, you know, first was to just kind of start off with the model, and then we would move forward. We kind of slowed a little bit in this process, and I'll kind of explain that here in a second. But before I do that, you know, just to ask a question to get some engagement, you know, here. How is your system addressing culturally responsive elements of PBIS? So I'd like to hear a little bit from you, maybe chat in the chat box there, and then we'll kind of continue on with our journey. See, Linda put chat here in the chat box there, so if anybody wants to type in, feel free.
So Tim, you talked about all the pieces working together to deal with disproportionality. Did you do any work, or did the district do any work to get all those pieces working together, or was it just luck and personalities just jived?
No, I can tell you, it certainly wasn't luck and personalities just jiving. I think we have some very heated conversations around things here. I have to give credit to our superintendent and our board on this one, that our superintendent led the charge and was the face of this change. And also the board, and together they worked on those values and vision, and they moved forward together. So having a united board supporting a superintendent to lead the work, I think, is very critical and has been essential for what we've been able to do here. It's not perfect, you know, what we do, but it certainly is important to have that. So, not seeing any chats typed in, I'm going to go ahead and kind of move on. So in 12-13, we continued that work with Dr. Eyler as kind of our technical assistant and somebody to kind of guide us and help us think through this process. And we started by establishing those PBIS teams at each site. So it's very critical to have a team at each site because you have to have some ownership. And we decided we were going to go district-wide with this, and I think a traditional PBIS implementation is probably a site-to-site thing in many districts. If you want to do it, here it is, you can do it. For us, that was going to be non-negotiable. So we had to create those teams and get them to buy into this concept. We also needed a data system that our data system didn't support analysis of office discipline referrals. And so what we chose to do, rather than going with an outside vendor, is we chose to create our own. And so we took a look at Swiss, which many of you may be familiar with, that the University of Oregon puts out, that most people use for PBIS. We kind of made our own Swiss. So we took the reports and the things there, and we went totally online with referrals. So we don't even have paper referrals anymore. That way we could get all the data and disaggregate it. And then we started looking at risk ratios and reporting out those things to our staff and to our cabinet. So, you know, here are just some of the examples of some of the reports or the graphs. You look and see they kind of look like Swiss reports. The one in the top left is a disproportionality report, where we look at each month the relative risk that kids have of receiving an office discipline referral or a suspension. And we've even created positive referrals, and so as a result, you know, we look at that risk too. You know, how likely are kids to receive a positive recognition? So, and having all this data is really important because it allows us to get facts out there to people. You know, here's what the data says, and without the data, you can't make the decisions you need to. So this was a big critical step for us. Also, we created our own model, if you will, for Tier 1. So, and there's a link to our website where this stuff is located later on in the presentation, and this is on there. So we basically took the technical assistance documents that come out of the PBIS Technical Assistance Center, and we just adapted them and changed them to fit our needs in Bakersfield City. And that gave us some ownership of it and allowed us to you know, move forward with, you know, with guidance for our school sites. And then we trained it. So in there are laid out steps that every school is supposed to do to implement Tier 1 of PBIS at their sites. We also started regularly monitoring data in the superintendent's cabinet. So once a month, I bring data. I work with our research and evaluation person. We collaborate on what's the right data that we need to bring, and that's changed over time. The initial data we looked at, we needed to change and address. So also we began doing cultural proficiency work with our administrators as well, and having the deep conversation. So a lot of what we did too is to create space for conversation, that you can't force a person to be culturally proficient. And I can honestly say that if I were to go back, you know, 5 or 6, even 7 years in my career, I had some different views on the work that we're doing now. But it's through the conversations and through having space for that that you're allowed to make adjustments in your thinking. And that certainly benefited for myself and a lot of my colleagues. There's something in the chat box about talking a little bit more about positive referrals. So there's research out there that says that effective business environments, effective family units, that the ratio of positive to negative interactions is a strong indicator of production or how long a marriage is going to stay together. And the same thing really holds true in classrooms, because the classroom is really all about relationships. And so what we decided to do is, how can we capture and quantify positive interactions? And so we created this idea of, well, if we can write negative referrals, let's write positive ones. So we created in our electronic system a way for people to record positive interactions. So we don't expect that people from PBIS. So in 2013 was our first full implementation of doing Tier 1. And so what we did is we did a couple of things to help us with that. One, we did self-assessment surveys that the SAS, again, is a fidelity tool, if you will, or a way of getting feedback from staff regarding implementation. And we use that for schools to write action plans with for their first year. We did that early on in the year. This year, we are going to do that later in the year, so it becomes more of a feedback piece on how things went this year and what should we start off with for next year. And then we also do the SET, which is a school-wide evaluation tool. And as John mentioned, we are going through a process right now of trying to do our own modifications to that to make it a little more culturally responsive and to give us a more deeper gauge of implementation. We also started doing something called 60-day action planning cycles. And that's where every 60 days our schools are required to write a plan based on their data. They submit it to the district. They actually have to present it to the superintendent's cabinet through what we call an action research summit process. And then, we go back after 60 days and say, well, okay, well, how'd the plan work? What's the data say? What do we need to adjust? So it's a way to keep us consistently thinking about behavior and data and addressing disproportionality issues in our schools. All right, so another big undertaking was our guiding coalition training. So being a very large district, it was difficult to figure out how are we going to train everyone. So what we landed on was we need kind of a trainer of trainer models, or what we call the guiding coalition. And so our assistant superintendent and superintendent, they kind of picked this up through the PLC, the people we were working with through PLC. And so we decided to have on Saturdays, each school would bring basically a leadership team who they felt their guiding coalition was, and we would do training on PLC, PBIS, and cultural proficiency. So Jon was our trainer for PBIS, and we did that. We had those meetings about once a month. And so as a result of that, schools were able to get training, and with the intent of taking it back to the school site. Didn't always work perfectly that way. Some schools did a better job of doing that than others. But overall, it's been a fairly effective way of diffusing knowledge into the system. And it also, again, allowed for those conversations. So with that cultural proficiency piece, for the first time, we're really having deep conversations about race and culture with the leaders at school sites. We also do monthly PD for PBIS leads. We have each school identify a lead facilitator. And the reason is, ideally you want the principal to do everything, but principals, their time is very valuable, very precious. And so we asked them to identify somebody that could assist them in leading this work at the school site. And in some places it is the principal. The principal took on that role. In other places it's a support person. So I do monthly professional development with them where we problem solve what's going on in Tier 1 and how to make Tier 1 better. We also developed a plan then for Tier 2 and Tier 3. And we wrote all of this into our board policy and administrative regulations. So it's written in stone, so to speak. And part of that is to kind of formalize it so that, if ever anyone leaves in a key role, you have a written guidance as to what should occur, and you have a written commitment from both the board and the superintendent. And so we really wanted that to be a key part of us moving forward. All right, so there's probably several other things that we did during that time that I've missed. I mean, there are we have directors that go out and supervise the schools, and the principals that support this work and hold them accountable, and they play a critical role as well. But here's a little bit of data for you. So I showed you the 10-11 numbers. Our 2013-14 numbers that we had, you can see there's pretty big, significant reduction. There's been over a 50% reduction in suspension incidences and days during that time. And we attribute that to the work that we're doing here and the accountability work that we do around that. So we're excited about that. And this year we've seen even greater decreases. So we're excited. It's not perfect what we do. We still have areas we can improve upon, but it's been a good journey for us. So if you look at our rates around groups, in 2010-11, a quarter of our African American students would have received a suspension. Last year that rate was down to 14%. So that's a big drop, but that's still really high, especially when our district rate last year was at 5%. And so you see that there is significant work that we still need to do and that we're committed to doing going forward, and I'll kind of describe what we're doing about that. But so again, you can kind of see we still have things that we need to work on. So a couple key implementation things during this time. was that, again, implementation was not an option. And the superintendent mandated that, it was supported by the board, and he led that work. And I think that's really critical. I think at any point when you have a person in leadership, if they're not fully vested in the direction, there's a potential for the system to break down. And then as a result, that can undermine everything. I serve as the district lead responsible for coordinating the structures. That's been a very important role, just to have somebody that can answer questions and provide support and do training and things. So I've taken that on, and that's been critical, I think, for our district. Also, we put all these district structures in place for monitoring implementation. We use the fidelity instruments like the SET. We also have, our data system that we use, which we're beginning to outgrow, that we're looking at how can we even do that better. And then just having support structures for implementation, having those lead meetings, having regular monthly reporting, the guiding coalitions, and the action research summits. I want to say a little bit about that. We kind of took that model from Sanger, and we worked a little bit with Rich Schmidt from Sanger, who was their assistant superintendent at one point, and we adopted this, where now 3 times a year, our principals come in and they have to present their academic data and their discipline data, and also data related to disproportionality, those risk ratios. And again, we can have those conversations directly with our principals. It's an accountability measure for us, and it also gives us a lot of great information about what's occurring at our district. And you can imagine in a large district with 43 schools, it's sometimes hard to get a pulse on certain things, and so it really helps to have that going on. And so that's a pretty critical role for us to have those in place. All right, so some things that we've started doing this year. So one of the things we looked at is we realized that there's probably some variability out there in how we were responding to behavior. And we also needed to begin to diffuse kind of restorative justice practices and principles and kind of overlay that on the work that we're doing as a philosophy for how to deal with problem behavior in kids. So we created a guide for administrators. You can also find this on our website. And, a lot's been said about you don't want these rigid guides that say if this happens, you must do this. So that's not what this is. We didn't want that. What we did is we laid out all the problem behaviors we could think of in our district. And we looked at what level of response was appropriate for those problem behaviors. And so we leveled out responses. And we also said that for every response you have, you need to have an intervention. And that was actually an idea. I can't even remember what webinar I was watching, but it was last year, and somebody said that, and I thought, that is really true. That if we're going to hold people responsible and give them a consequence, we also need to provide support so that they don't, reoffend. Because consequences, as we know, aren't the whole solution sometimes to fixing the problem. So we laid that out. So that's kind of what that middle sheet is on the screen there. And then over on the right, you can see is where all the problem behaviors are, what level that we feel is most appropriate to deal with in that. And we give kind of a caveat that says, you're supposed to start at the lowest level. So just because something, could be done at a level 4, that you really need to start earlier in that. Doesn't mean that you can't do it at that level and maybe issue a suspension, but you have to use judgment to try to resolve things at the lowest level. So that's been a big piece to help guide our administrators when applying things. All right, so before I talk about our Tier 2 systems that we developed, I thought I might ask out there, how is your district addressing and developing Tier 2? It's kind of something I think many people are doing around the state or starting to, so what ideas do you have out there? So if you want to chat those in there or anything, that would be great.
And Tim, if participants want to press *6, they can also ask their questions verbally. So I want to give participants a chance to do that, not only write into chat, but also press *6. Don't be afraid. You're amongst friends.
All right. Well, I'm gonna move on, and you can always feel free to email me or email John or give us a phone call too if you want to ask questions later. I know sometimes I prefer to do that after I participate in things like this. So, all right. So for Tier 2, some of the things we did is we issued basically a guidebook again to all our administrators and did training on that. So again, we looked at a lot of research, and what's really neat about PBIS, I think, is that there's just so much on the web that you can find about how people are implementing. And if you go to that guidebook on our website, we give credit to people, obviously, we've taken ideas from. So it's nice because you can actually do a lot of research on your own and look at how things are implementing and find people to contact and talk to. And then it's almost kind of amazing that California hasn't really been doing some of this organized work. So, but we get to do it now. So we have implementation steps that we're going to do for that. We also created a flow chart, you see on your right, a decision-making tree for how students get identified and receive service in Tier 2. And so we wanted to create a document that if somebody could, you know, put Tier 2 decision-making in a nutshell, it was on one page. And so whenever I train, whenever I go support, you know, I always pull that out. That's like the graphic organizer that we use to kind of help people think through the work and where they're at in the process. That's been very critical. So one of the things we did is we decided we needed to leverage our LCFF funding and our LCAP to do this work, and we feel really fortunate to have that funding and that the state made that decision because as a high poverty district, high EL district, where 88% of our kids are, you know, identified as receiving, you know, contributing to our supplemental and concentration funds, you know, we were able to do a lot of this work and put support in place. So we hired 42 behavioral intervention specialists, and we also specifically called out in the LCAP that we were having these folks work primarily with students, primarily African American students, who have disproportionate numbers of office referrals and suspensions. So again, we called it out publicly that that's what we were doing for that. We also, and those people at the sites, basically they implement the Tier 2 structures that we have there, the check-in and check-out, the check and connect mentoring, the social skills group. That's their role. So we were able to price those positions to kind of steal away people from our local mental health industries, if you will. And we underwent training with them and then got them in place. And so we've had that going for about 3 or 4 months now, and you know, it's good. There's some implementation hiccups, obviously, getting people adjusted to working at school sites that haven't been there before. But overall, it's going well, and the anecdotal stories that we hear about how kids' behavior is turning around is really encouraging. So we look forward at the end of the year to seeing kind of more quantitative data results there. We also hired 6 youth services specialists, and their primary role is to do that check and connect mentoring piece, is to really work on school disengagement with students, primarily 4th through 8th grade students, and we assign them in an equity-based way so that groupings of schools that had more African American students kind of received more increased support. And that, again, was keeping with our value of equity. And then we also use them to support our foster youth as well, which are, you know, identified in our LCAP and generate funding for the district. So they are itinerant. They don't stay at a specific site. So that's why we went with the Check and Connect mentoring model. If you want to research that model, it's out of the University of Minnesota, and I'd say it's considered the gold standard for mentoring programs. So I would highly encourage you to go there. There's lots of resources available there. Also, we hired a full-time PBIS clerk. We realized that we needed more efficient ways to push out data and to push out documents and things to our site. And then we continue with Dr. Eyler for our PD, and he's doing on-site coaching support with our behavior intervention specialists, which is great. In fact, he just did a round of that yesterday. And, you know, it's nice to provide somebody who can provide detailed technical assistance for people implementing on the ground. That it's really hard to do this work when you're flying in the blind and nobody can kind of come out to the context you're in. and say, what do you think of this, or have you thought of that, or, I've seen this work over here. So Dr. Eyler provides that role for us, and we appreciate that. Also, we started implementing Second Step as a social skills curriculum, and that's kind of the basis we use for social skills. Some of our people are beginning to see that that's not comprehensive enough, that we need probably other resources, and we're providing those as well. So these are pretty big actions. This was pretty expensive for us to do, but we were able to do it with our LCAP funding, our LCFF funding. So another question, maybe you'll respond. How is your district utilizing LCFF dollars for addressing disproportionality and social emotional needs of students? So if anyone out there would like to comment or say, please feel free to do that in the chat box. And while I'm waiting, I'll take a drink of water. All right, so there's a question there. Who receives the Second Step courses? So as a part of that flow chart, we identify students that we feel have a skill deficit, if you will, and that's what's contributing to their behavior. So for instance, if I have issues with aggression, or I simply can't accept responsibility for actions I take and apologize, we don't view that as, they're unable to do that. We review it as a skill that needs to be taught. And so we identify that, and then we do that through Second Step. We also have some schools that have chosen to do Second Step school-wide. And if you call Second Step, if you call the people who produce that program, they will bill it as a Tier 1 across the school program. So ideally, I think we'd like to get there eventually, but that was too big of a step for us to just say, hey, everybody's going to teach Second Step. So we thought we'd start this way and let that diffuse into sites who began to see the value of that. So, but we do have that. And sometimes we even have our BISs who go directly into classrooms and do whole classroom lessons on social skills using the Second Step curriculum. So thank you for that question. All right, so kind of where we are right now. Our future steps that we are looking at is we need to make our fidelity instruments more sensitive to determining cultural responsiveness. One thing I didn't mention earlier that's been big is, and you may be wondering, is how we're addressing certain disproportionality issues and cultural proficiency. Well, our assistant superintendent of AIA, Academic Improvement, they worked with Core One Press to create an online professional development course around cultural proficiency. And while it's not perfect, it is, again, another way of diffusing conversation and thought into our system. And, while it's kind of a slow drip of doing this work, we recognize you just can't force people to get there. Forcing people to get there produces a very negative response, and that's not what we're looking for. So that's been a really critical thing in doing that. But now we kind of got to get a way of measuring it. So we're, Jon and I are working together and with some others on how we might do that. We also have to continue to diffuse the restorative justice principles and practices throughout our system. We've kind of held off on going the full-blown, everybody's going to do circles and do those kind of structures, simply because of the sheer size of our district and wanting to really do that work well. And so we're going to start, doing more on getting the philosophy out there, getting the thinking and addressing the thinking related to harm with our staffs first, before we get into, okay, what are some ways that we can address that? So we just felt that was a better, kind of learning from our past experiences, better way of addressing it. We need to refine our data system. We're outgrowing it. It's actually old now, and it's just not doing what we need to do. We need to look at deeper levels of data analysis, and so right now we do a lot of things in Excel in order to do that, and so we're kind of struggling with, hey, what the best data system will be to help us do what we need to do. And then we need to add more intensive support for our Tier 3 students. Helping our schools understand the difference between a Tier 3 student and a Tier 2 student is a struggle. Our schools tend to look at kids and see a kid that's in need, and that means, oh, they must be a Tier 2 student. Well, they might need more intensive support, more wraparound, more individualized support. And so we're hopefully looking in our next LCAP revision and our next round of funding to add some more intensive support for those students. All right, so this was data that we just took a snapshot of through January 13th. So if you look at there, our rate, through January 13th, the previous year was 2.7%. It's about halfway to that 5 that we ended up last year. So far this year, we're at 1.44%. So we've basically, cut that in half, and that's great. That's amazing. That would be the greatest single reduction we've had ever. And you can see the difference in the reduction of incidences and the reduction of days that we have. Also, if you look at our African American suspension rate during this time, you'll see that last year at this time it was 7%, about halfway to that 14, and this year it's at 3.85. So again, we continue to reduce that, and that's our goal. Is to continue to get better and better. I have a saying that I say to our people that nobody expects us to be perfect. We're not going to be perfect, but they do expect us to be awesome. And what awesome means is that, hey, we need to be continually refining what we do, and just when people think that we've reached our end, that we show them we can go further. So that's where we're going. So it's not perfect, but I do say our systems here are awesome. Just for reference here is the link to some resources. I think it's really important that people share work in this area. It certainly has been important for me in trying to lead this work here, that other states have put their stuff freely on the internet for people to access. So I do have things available here. It's not all the stuff probably we have. As we develop things and feel it's ready for public consumption, we try to put things on there. So please feel free to go there. Please feel free to call me if you got a question about something or you got a suggestion. We're always looking to do things better. All right, so before I turn over to John, I do want to say one thing, that doing this work is really, it can be very difficult because you're really addressing hearts and minds of people. And when there's been systems of oppression that have lingered throughout our society for years, those things, whether we realize it or not, sometimes attach ourselves to our thinking without us even knowing. And so when you begin to change that, it's very difficult. And so we experience that. So if you experience that frustration or pushback, I just want you to feel you're not alone in that. We recently, got some negative feedback of sorts from people who are frustrated because, we're not excluding kids they feel they think should be excluded. So, we're trying to work with those students. So just know that you're not alone in this work and that it is difficult. There's a question that came in that says, hoping there's a link to the online PD. The online PD, there isn't a link there because that's something that's kind of proprietary to Corwin and that we have a contract with them on. But if you'd like more information about that, I can certainly put you in contact with the people who are doing that, and they'll probably be able to give you a guest account or let you, look at it in some way. And then also, as we address the set and make those changes, that's listed there too, we'll put that on the web as well. We're kind of finalizing that process. We expect to have that done within the month. So, and we'll go from there. And we welcome feedback on anything that we have there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and thank you for allowing me to present today.
Well, Tim, there's also there's another question.
Okay.
And that is the data, the most recent data looks very, very favorable for Bakersfield, and the data speaks loud and clear. But could you talk about the kind of the climate in the school setting, and have you seen the changes that come about from that are indicated by the data? Can you talk about any of the changes that you see within the schools?
Yeah, if you walk our schools, and if you had walked our schools 4 years ago and you walk them now, you can feel it. And I know John will attest to that. He just visited a school yesterday and said, wow, this is completely different than what it was 3 years ago. And so there's that, which that's kind of anecdotal, and you kind of have to be there to experience that. We do climate surveys, and we're looking at how to capture, student responses better too, so that we can get a gauge from students how they feel, and then we also do staff climate surveys. So, that's kind of where our greatest struggle is right now, is that at some places the climate is really great amongst the staff, and the belief system is there, and then other places they're kind of struggling with that. And I think that's the nature of doing the work in a very large system. So, but we are committed to keep working on that, and every now and then I have to dispel myths for schools, about, nobody said we're supposed to do it like this. You can have some autonomy to do it this way. Because sometimes when things get too rigid, that's where the climate becomes an issue. It serves as a negative reinforcer to bad climate. So, we look forward to kind of quantifying that a little bit better. So maybe in the future we'll have some data that we can share out that does that. But that's a great question. Oh, and also along those lines, we will administer the SAS again at the end of this year, and that is a direct feedback instrument allowing people to rate how certain things are going at their site, and also which items they perceive need to be addressed by the school site. So it's a way to help give teachers a direct feedback to administrators and to the district as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jon.
Great, thanks. So in terms of future developments with Bakersfield City, there's really three areas that I see. One is the sustainability, the second in the area of data, both outcome data and fidelity, and then professional development. With regard to the data piece, there are two areas that I want to speak to just real briefly. One is the fidelity, and we've been talking about using the set. Let me just give you some ideas of what this thinking is right now in looking at the set. The set really has a tendency to look at the structural elements, and so in Bakersfield City Schools, when you look at the set being administered across all 42, 43 schools, the rates are very high, but the degree of implementation when you're on the site is a little bit different from site to site. And so it measures the structural pieces, but there's a deeper level that we're wanting to take us in terms of implementation of fidelity and implementation. So here's some of the questions that come up. Have staff had a discussion around race or culture this year? I mean, has that been part of the normal conversation? Does the data protocol that you use to analyze school-wide trends, does that include a consideration or an area for a cultural hypothesis? Are we considering race or culture in our school-wide systems and our patterns that we're seeing? When we look at the PBIS team at the school site, is it intentionally diverse? Are we looking at folks who would identify with the same culture or the same racial ethnic category, or is that diverse? So these are some of the deeper questions that we're seeking to ask when we visit sites and look at fidelity from a culturally responsive lens. The table that I put up in the very beginning with Eddie Fergus and Russell Skiba, there's some structural elements in there, so disaggregation of data by race and ethnicity. Bakersfield has been doing that, and they've been tracking that for a couple of years, but that alone isn't enough to really close that gap, and so we're really hoping to take it to the next level with asking some of these deeper questions around race and ethnicity. One of the other things I wanted to point out in here is that the data for this district has been really important because it's really forged some critical conversations. I don't think the conversations would have occurred if they didn't really have the data to ask the questions to. Why are we seeing this with our African American population? One of the slides previously that Tim shared was the drastic drop in African American suspensions. When you look at the African American subgroup in this district and compare that in proportion to the white subgroup, it's pretty similar. But you see, different numbers. I think it was around 14% for your African American students right now, and I want to say it was closer to 5% for the white population. There's still a massive discrepancy between the two, even though there's been a lot of progress in the area of reducing suspensions overall for African American students. And so I think the data still, when that's in front of you, you have to ask some questions as to why that continues to be what it is. And so the data for Bakersfield has been extremely important. And maintaining those conversations and also taking it a step further. So just some examples of what they might want to consider doing. So these are trending events, and this is not uncommon for a school system or a district to be able to disaggregate data like this, where they look at trends over multiple years. And we look at, so for example, tardies. Do we see a trend in February, March, where we might see a spike in that? Or total events. When you look down to the bottom right, our total events tend to spike in March, right before April. Well, if we disaggregated these data by race and ethnicity, I think it would force a different conversation. Why do our tardies trend differently for Latino students than they do for African American students? And those are some of the conversations around data that I think Bakersfield City is really ready to have.
So, John, there's a question from Jesus. How do you do the student survey to measure the climate and connectedness at schools? Could you give examples?
Well, I know Tim mentioned he does a school climate survey. One of the conversations we've had today is using, you go to plusprogram.org, I believe is the website, the URL. There's a surveying system that allows you to capture student data, and that you can customize it to make it your own. So if you want to focus on connectedness, you can come up with 10 questions from a bank around connectedness. If you want to look at bullying, you can come up with 10 questions around bullying, and you can survey a certain grade level. And it also gives you some comparative work or some comparisons to other students of that same grade level throughout California. I believe Stockton is using the system right now, and it's flexible in that you can create and kind of focus your surveys to a certain population and also a certain area.
You know, also our research and evaluation director, Dr. Elizondo, she's been looking into this and doing some kind of background work on this as well. And so if you contact me, I can put you in touch with her, and she could probably collaborate with you, Sue, on that as well. We have been doing the California Healthy Kids Survey, but we've only been doing it in selected grades here, and that gives us some really good information. But we kind of felt like we needed to go beyond that and do things across look to do things across our system. So, but if you want more conversation on that, Jesus, please give me a call, and I can put you in touch with our people here.
The other piece that we're being very intentional about this year is tracking disproportionality and discipline, specifically looking at students in special education with more than 10 days of suspension, only because that's been a heightened area of concern in Bakersfield City Schools. So we're tracking monthly the number of students who are contributing to those disproportionality indicators with regard to discipline.
And I'll just jump in with that too, and just say that one of the things that our special education department does and really focuses on is dedicated to intense monitoring of special education students and where they're at in terms of the number of suspensions, and to make sure that we're trying not to be significantly disproportionate again, and that monitoring has really helped out, and also helped out to do manifestations much earlier in the process with those students, so we can determine whether or not we really need to do more intensive interventions earlier before they reach those 10 days of suspension.
I'm going to show you a couple other slides. This is in development, but it gives you kind of an idea of what you might be able to do within your student information system to be able to track and monitor kids through tiers. So where Bakersfield City is at right now, they're implementing Tier 2 this year. So they have the structural pieces in place. They have a Tier 2 guidebook. They've got referral forms. They have screening tools. They have a process for using check-in, check-out, and how they monitor progress of kids. And they have all the structural pieces in place, and it's actually hitting the ground right now. So they hired folks, and I think it's about 3 months into actually delivering Tier 2 services. And so now it's raising questions in terms of long-term. How do we track kids through tiers? And it's looking a little bit different from site to site. Do we have a data system that needs to monitor how long kids are in Tier 2, whether or not that's effective for kids? And so these are just some of our thinking in terms of building an online system that allows you to do that. So being able to track the length of time a student is in a tier or receiving a tiered intervention. The other thing is tiers are not mutually exclusive. So we can have, Marcus, who's receiving a Tier 2 intervention, he's in a social skills group and on check-in, check-out, but is also receiving a Tier 3 intervention at the same time. So it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but we want to see how long kids are actually participating in these tiered interventions.
Yeah, I want to, John, maybe think of something related to tiered interventions. One of the lessons learned for us so far this year, I guess I can't remember. Yeah, one of the lessons learned so far this year is that I think people thought once these Tier 2 folks kind of hit the ground that all of a sudden, the students would be, fixed, so to speak, and there wouldn't be any problems anymore, that instantly one social skills lesson maybe was going to, magically work. And I think that's a holdover from the old idea that if I write a referral and send them to the office, that consequence is going to fix them. Well, helping people understand that, research says it takes 6 to 8 weeks to really, probably see significant change. And helping people see that just because a student does something, doesn't mean that they might do it again. It's difficult for some of our staff, and I think that's been some of the pushback we've received as well. And then also understanding that, hey, some of our kids need much more intensive support, and we don't necessarily have that support already for them. So if you implement these things, you might think about that. How are you going to address that with staff ahead of time so that the expectations aren't in the wrong place, so that they don't start to want to shoot down what you're doing simply because they thought it was all going to change overnight. So just something to consider.
I'm going to move the PD piece here real quick. So one of the other things we've noticed this year is that this is the PBIS in terms of establishing the Tier 1. Bakersfield City has been doing that. This is now year 2 of doing that. And so the classroom level is really where we're seeing the need to place more of our professional development and efforts in that area. And I think sometimes what happens in initial PBIS implementation, there's kind of this tendency to just not send kids up to the office or just to hold on to kids, and eventually that catches up to you and you realize that I need a lot more strategies and I need other resources to be able to do that. And so now that the structures are in place and we are working with kids differently in terms of behavioral violations or behavioral errors, there's a greater need to provide a larger audience of people, if you will, in terms of behavioral strategies. So some of those areas, classroom management, I was just talking with the behavior intervention group yesterday, and they said, the field that we come from, a lot of these folks are coming from social services or mental behavioral health, and they said, we need strategies in terms of classroom management to better know how to coach teachers in that area. But teachers also need classroom management strategies or some help in terms of additional tools. The social-emotional learning piece, we had 2 conversations yesterday around mindfulness and being explicit about teaching kids to be present and utilizing strategies to kind of calm themselves down and bring themselves back. So that's another area that we're seeing growth in. Culturally responsive training, Tim mentioned that, but we are really focused now on what structures will drive the sustainability of cultural responsiveness. We had a call earlier today with Eddie Ferguson. I said, Eddie, if you walked onto a campus and you were looking to gauge whether or not this campus was culturally responsive, what would you look for? What are some of the things that you would hear? What would the conversation be with people? And so now our focus is how do we structurally set this up so that the structures in the system create a culturally responsive value system. And it's evident by what you see and by what you hear. The social skills piece is, Tim mentioned the second step. That's been a commitment of the district to invest in resources like that for all schools. What I'm hearing from some of the upper grades, the 4th and 5th grade and middle schools, is they want a greater bank of resources. And so we're looking at some options for them to be able to tap into additional social skills. Restorative practices, Tim's mentioned that. That's an area of focus for Bakersfield City Schools. And then as we start to look at Tier 3, the focus will then shift to individual student interventions. So what happens when kids are persistently not responding to either the social skill program or the check-in, check-out, or whatever else we're putting together, aggression replacement training, or even some type of substance intervention. What happens when kids don't respond to Tier 2, we need to shift to more of an individualized attempt to address behavior. So this is something that's up and coming, but these are just kind of a bank, if you will, of areas of focus in professional development.
John jogged my memory on something I just thought of. The question was there about how people are receiving this and the culture and things, and there have been some teachers, they feel frustrated when the kid goes to the office on referral and they come back and in their mind something hasn't been done to the kid, and what we're seeing is that for low-level repetitive behaviors that normally would be a classroom-managed type issue, that our teachers have been holding on to those kids for a long time, so that when they do send them to the office, there's a disconnect sometimes with the office about how they should respond. They see it as a low-level classroom-managed behavior, and maybe don't take the right response or see it as a red flag, so this kid needs support or the teacher needs support, and there's not communication there. And so we're noticing that one of the things we need to do is increase communication besides a referral, an office discipline referral, regarding behavior between staff and administration. And then also that we have to institute a reentry procedure for schools that's restorative in nature, because if I've held on to a kid for so long in the classroom, trying my best as a teacher, and then all of a sudden, I'm done, I've had it, I've reached that breaking point, I send them to the office and they come back, and we haven't dealt with the harm that I maybe feel, my attitude towards that child is probably going to be changed from that point forward. And it also strains my attitude towards administration as well. So we're looking at how can we do that at our sites and having our sites have that reentry procedure. And so I think that's our kind of big focus for us in adding that restorative practices to our system. So, thanks, John.
So, George, you asked what else are you seeing as a result of this, and I can just give an anecdotal response. I was meeting with behavior intervention specialists at a middle school yesterday, and just an interaction that stuck out in my mind. I was with the school several years ago, and so I saw where they started from in this work, and one of the behavior intervention specialists said, well, the question was directed to the dean. How would you respond to a kid who was sent up to the office for cussing a teacher out? And the dean said, well, it really depends on the situation. And I thought, man, that's a response that's not very typical, right? In the middle school, there's typically like a matrix that says, first time this happens, this is the consequence that's assigned. Second time it happens, here's the consequence. And we just follow kind of the protocol. And what I saw in this team was that there was a commitment to problem solving and figuring out where the issue was. Was it a misperception? Did the student misread something within the teacher and responded in a way that was inappropriate? It's an opportunity to go back and correct the error, correct the misperception. It wasn't an automatic consequence. And so that when you talk about what are the side effects, or the outcomes, if you will, or the effects of this, yeah, you can see reductions in numbers, but those are the things that I see that I think I'm most proud of in this district, is they've done a lot of really deep work to shift a discipline system that's punitive in nature to a system that's restorative and it's instructional in nature. So it's hard to quantify that, but I think that's a testament. There are two middle schools up here that have also done a really good job in establishing Tier 2 and Tier 3 systems, and I would, if you're interested in taking a look at that, I would say definitely take a look at, contact Tim and see if you can't be in touch with these middle schools, but they've done a really good job of setting up Tier 2 and Tier 3 systems for kids who are not in special ed, and that seems to be kind of a struggling point for a lot of districts.
There's a question on there about does our district hire a coordinator to manage the PD? It's really the several individuals working together. So I kind of coordinate professional development related to certain parts of our PBIS system. We have a behavioral health unit that primarily works with Tier 3 students that are receiving special education services. They also provide certain levels of support. And then, again, on our academic side, they handle the cultural proficiency part of the support. But the way that it works, or the reason it works, is that, we are in constant communication with one another. and our superintendent leads the work, and he hasn't let go of the work. He didn't say, okay, go do this now, you know, and then let it go. He leads the work, and as a result, that's what our superintendent's cabinet does. We have those conversations and move forward. So to answer that question, in terms of that image, I think John's typing in there about how you can get that.
So you can take a
take
screenshot
right now. Yeah, I actually think if you like Google that and you look at the images, I'll bet you it comes up. So
it's out there.
Yeah.
So I think, George, I don't know if we're able to unmute the lines, but if we want to just open it up for questions or comments, now would be a great time to.
Yeah, why don't you, for those questions or comments, why don't you participants press *6 and unmute your line, and you'll see on the slide there's Tim's and John's contact information. Tim has been so very, very generous in terms of offering himself as a resource. There's his email address and his phone number, and he said, hey, contact him, so take advantage of that. But I do want to leave a little bit of space for anybody who's got questions or comments now. Please press *6 or write into chat. But don't leave yet.
George, I also want to bring up the questions that we posed earlier. I'm really curious to know how other districts are addressing the culturally responsive piece of PBIS, because it's something that we're really struggling with and exploring at this point, and I've asked the same questions with other folks outside of the state. Wisconsin RTI Center is another one, the Florida PBIS Center. I'm just trying to get a better handle or get an idea of what other districts are doing to address the culturally responsive piece. So if you have feedback for us, please, I'd love to know what other systems are doing to address that.
And if you don't feel comfortable either chatting, please send your comments to John, and there's his email down there too. Tracy wrote something.
Yeah, okay, so like how we train people. So that's a good question. So we started off with, hired all these people and immediately realized that, you may not be able to hire 42 people at the same time and have them start at the same time, and I don't know why we didn't think of that before. But we did, with the initial group that we hired, we did do like 8 days of training, and it was a lot. John did a lot of specific training. We did touch on certain ABA-related themes and areas. We didn't do specific ABA training. So what we found going forward is that we can't replicate those 8 days again, right? We can't do that if somebody new comes on or whatever. So we've kind of adjusted our training to that. We do an overview with people, with the principal and the BIS or behavior people together, so that they hear the same message. That's something we learned as well. And then we immediately send the behavior intervention person to shadow a couple other people who we know are effectively implementing at sites. And then I also have regular meetings with them once a month. And then we have John that goes out and does training. And so our focus right now is let's just get the interventions up and running, those structures that we have, the check-in and check-out, the social skills group. And then over time, we'll do more specific ABA-related training. We're also looking, hopefully in the future, for our psychologists to have more of a role in this, and to try to expand our resources that way with people who, possibly school psychologists who have ABA training. But that's a solution we haven't necessarily solved yet either. Is that what level of training do we really need? Do we need a full-blown ABA course, or do we need it in parts, or what? So we'd love to hear ideas on that.
I can say specifically some of the things we did train on. We did Tier 1 systems. Tim trained on the Tier 2 system and how that flows structurally. We trained on check-in, check-out, active supervision, collaborative problem solving, They all went through PROACT training, I believe, for 2.5 days. We trained on functional behavioral assessments and behavior support plans. And then we also do, like Tim mentioned, we're meeting, it's about once a month. Yeah. We're meeting with all of the behavior intervention specialists in small cohorts. And we're just touching base on structures for Tier 2 implementation, and we also do some case management during that time. And I believe you're meeting with them monthly. Yeah. You have a monthly behavior intervention meeting, so it's a short time to be able to do some problem solving or do some quick PD. And
then also we have staff in a behavioral health unit that works in our special education department that also they have ABA training and a lot of experience working in intensive Tier 3 environments. And so when the need arises, they are responsive for us, and we can call on them for expertise to work with students. One of the issues that we have, I think a lot of people are struggling with, is there are support systems, a lot of places set up for Tier 3 students who are in special education, but not always is that available to students who aren't identified with a disability. And so we're trying to expand our services so that students can receive that intensive level of support without having to be identified under some qualifying disability. I mean, we've seen cases where people try to force people into OHI categories or ED categories just to get services, and we don't believe that's the right thing to do, that we need to find a different way to do that rather than to put that label on the student.
So Jesus writes, for culture responsive training, we're looking for resources in our community colleges and local universities. So if any participant has any ideas for that kind of training, please put it in chat or press *6. Okay.
Like I say, there are a couple modules that are out there. So NCREST has put out a series of culturally responsive training modules that I believe are available online. You can download those to take a look. And then I believe Dr. Eddie Fergus has some modules as well that can be used. So I would tap into those 2 resources.
All right. Great. Well, anybody have any other comments, questions? Okay, so with that, Tim and John, thank you so very, very much. It's been extremely informative, and the people who attended this, I'm sure, got a lot out of it. And for those people in the future who view this, they will. So thank you.